Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Andrew Kirchhoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're talking about Devonta Freeman, running back at the Atlanta Falcons, and whether he can be trusted going into our 2019 fantasy football seasons, or whether he's going to be a bust similar to last year due to his injury history. Now, we're going to be talking about the pros and the cons of his current situation, and then get to our conclusion on whether or not we can trust him, or whether he's going to be a bust in 2019. So before we begin, I want to remind you guys, not only should you subscribe to the channel, click the like button down below, and comment as usual, but I want to remind you guys that recently I have launched my campaign onto Patreon. And what exactly does that mean? Well, Patreon gives me another way to gain your guys' support for extra content. Now, what kind of extra content? My 2019 fantasy football draft kit, which includes 130 player profiles, rankings by position, by tier for half and full point PPR. On top of that, you can play in the league with me this coming season. On top of that, yes, it doesn't stop. From now on, YouTube-related fantasy football questions in the comment section will not be answered because of the fact of time constraints. If you go watch my Patreon video specifically, you'll get the full rundown and explanation of that. And that's all for only $5, guys. Not kidding. There's even more. There's going to be live streams that are only privated for Patreon supporters and extra videos like my top 5 sleepers of the 2019 season. So if you guys have the time, please go check it out. I appreciate all the support, and I love you guys, so much appreciated. All right, let's talk about Devonta Freeman, shall we? So we're talking about Devonta Freeman, and obviously there's mixed opinions. There's those of us who have been burnt by Devonta Freeman, and there's those of us that have an optimistic outlook for his 2019 season because of specific things. So as I said, we're going to talk about the pros and cons. Specifically, I want to talk about the pros of Devonta Freeman. Now, going into the 2019 season, the biggest difference in the Atlanta Falcons backfield is going to be the absence of Tevin Coleman. Now, what exactly does that present? Now that Tevin Coleman, through free agency, has gone over to the San Francisco 49ers to join that running back by committee, Devonta Freeman and Ito Smith are pretty much the primary two running backs. Now, what we've known from the past couple seasons within this offense is that, without a doubt, they want to use two running backs, not only to keep Devonta Freeman healthy, but in order to have a change of pace and be able to utilize multiple running backs, even in two backs formations potentially. So this is the deal. Devonta Freeman is going to have more opportunity because of Tevin Coleman's departure. Now, what did Tevin Coleman produce over the last couple seasons? Well, in the last 3 seasons, he's finished as the number 18, the number 21, and the number 19 running back in half-point PPR fantasy. Imagine that. At about 160 fantasy points per year, Tevin Coleman's been one of the most consistent backs, a guy that has finished as an RB2 for the last 3 years because of the fact that he's getting an ample amount of opportunity in this backfield, whether that's rushing attempts, whether that's goal line touches, whether that's targets. Tevin Coleman was getting opportunity. Now that Tevin Coleman's gone, we can assume that yes, Ito Smith is going to have more of a role in this offense. But on top of that, I expect Devonta Freeman to be the lead back and substantially get a lot more targets and rushing attempts than he got in the past. Now, we know from Devonta Freeman's history that back in 2015, the guy touched the ball 265 times on the ground, had 97 targets for 73 receptions. He finished that year with 1,600 yards and 14 touchdowns. That was back in 2015. Now, since then, he's dealt with a plethora of injuries, whether that be concussions, his MCL strain, the sports hernia that knocked him out for the entirety of last season, the bone bruise that pretty much stopped him from doing anything at the beginning of last year. So really, he's dealt with a plethora of injuries, that's for sure. But we know what he's capable of being. In the past 3 seasons, from 2015 to 2017, Devonta Freeman finished as the number 1, let me go ahead and find this, the number 6 and the number 13 running back in half-point PPR. So for sure, Devonta Freeman is an RB1 within this Atlanta Falcons offense, even with Tevin Coleman being an RB2 just right behind him, having just as many, not just as many, but a substantial amount of touches for a backfield that uses a two-headed monster kind of scheme. Similar to the similar to the New Orleans Saints these last couple years with Mark Ingram and Alvin Kamara. Two-headed monsters, they work in the NFL, especially when you have a high-powered offense with good receivers, a good quarterback, and you want to score him as many points as possible. In those 3 seasons from 2015 to 2017, Devonta Freeman scored a total of 35 touchdowns. 29 touchdowns on the ground, that tied with just about anybody, or actually was tied for first in those 3 seasons. So Devonta Freeman, we know what he's capable of. He's capable of being an RB1 with the opportunity, staying healthy, and playing a full 16-game season. We know that for sure. Now that Tevin Coleman is gone and Devonta Freeman is healthy, because he's had just about an entire year off now. Okay? He's gotten his body right. He's gotten his mind right. He's ready to go into this 2019 season and be the clear back and carry the Atlanta Falcons, because by God, did they need it. Last year, with Tevin Coleman as the RB1, Tevin Coleman still finished as an RB2, even with the reins of the backfield. But here's the thing. Tevin Coleman wasn't given the opportunity to be the RB1. With only 167 rushing attempts, Tevin Coleman wasn't really... the opportunity wasn't much different than when Devonta Freeman was in that backfield. I think he got like 10 more touches from the season prior when he had to split the backfield with Devonta Freeman. So last year, the Atlanta Falcons completely just ditched the running game. They said to themselves, we can't sustainably win games with our defense being a liability and then have a plethora of receivers with Julio to Mohamed Sanu, Calvin Ridley, Austin Hooper, all being capable and not throw the ball 60+% of the time. And that's exactly what they did. They shut off the running game. And I think going into 2019, they need to turn it around. And I know for a fact they're going to. Because of the liability of their defense last year, and because they have addressed already their offensive line this offseason, they're going to get back to running the ball. This offseason, they brought in 2 first-round offensive linemen, Lindstrom, McGarry, and then on top of that, they went into free agency. They signed Carpenter to be the left guard. They still have Matthews. They still have Alex Mack, the all-pro center. So this offensive line, they've bolstered them up here. With 2 first-round picks, going and getting another guy in free agency, already having 2 established offensive linemen with your left tackle and your center, basically the guys that are best friends with the quarterback at this point. So as of right now, they've locked up their offensive line. They have a deadly receiving core. And all they need is Devonta Freeman to run wild in 2019. And I know he's capable of doing that. And I know many people are concerned about his injury history, and we'll go into that. But I personally think that the way that the Atlanta Falcons offense is run, with their running scheme of off-tackle zone plays, with their cutback scheme, on top of that, just halfback tosses. All they want to do is get Devonta Freeman off tackle outside in order to help him make plays. They're not going to run him in between the tackles, even though they have in the past, and he's surely capable of running over linebackers. Because of his injury history, they have to be careful with him. They can't run him up the middle every single time. If they're going to do so, they have Ryan Ortiz. They have already established a fullback in order to run the I formation and then plug it up the middle, so that Devonta Freeman is not, taking instant contact as soon as he touches the ball. There's a fullback in front of him as an insurance policy that last year they used about 14% of the time in their offense. So they've already got that kind of settled. Now, with Dirk Cutter coming into this offense, new offensive coordinator, they got rid of Steve Sarkisian. Thank the Lord, okay? But Dirk Cutter could be a sketchy, because Dirk Cutter loves to pass the ball, and what we saw him do with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers last season, he made the Tampa Bay Buccaneers offense just ridiculous. In terms of quarterback play for fantasy, Fitzmagic and Winston combined for the most points at the quarterback position. They had 3 top 30 wide receivers in half-point PPR with Humphreys, Godwin, and Evans. So they can surely recreate that in Atlanta. In the same division, they can surely recreate that in a division that promotes shootouts. Plain and simple. The NFC South, everybody wants to just outscore each other. Defenses are a liability, but nobody cares because it's shootout central. And that's exactly what the fantasy gods intended. And that's why I love this division. So going into 2019, with the opportunity of Tevin Coleman's targets going in the direction of a guy like Devonta Freeman, who's extremely capable, him being healthy, finally, there's not even a looming injury this offseason. Now, last offseason, he had that bone bruise during weeks 3 and 4 of the preseason. We knew about that, yet we still drafted him. Now, going into this season, as long as he stays squeaky clean in the next couple weeks, I doubt he plays a preseason game. I don't think they're going to put him on the field in the preseason. It's not worth it, to be honest. So they can have him ready for week 1 against Minnesota. So as of right now, with the opportunity of Tevin Coleman, which is, to be honest, 160 rushing attempts, 50 targets, going to Ito Smith at in a sustainable amount, and then the rest going towards Devonta Freeman, I expect the guy to have 250 touches this year in an offense that's as high scoring as this. 8+ touchdowns, potentially breaking 1,000 total yards shouldn't be a big deal. And sitting as an RB2, that seems like a perfect range for Devonta Freeman as of right now, considering the inherent risk. So that's what we're going to talk about now. I want to talk about the cons of this situation. Yes, it all looks dandy, but there are issues, and I specifically want to talk about his injury. So let's go ahead and look at his injury history. Look at it's tough to look at it because he has had so many concussions as of late. Just since 2017, back-to-back concussions in a 3-month span. That's awful. You can't sustainably play in the NFL with that kind of concussion reoccurrence. You're not going to be able to survive. On top of that, his body has just been his own biggest weakness, to be honest. Whether it's the MCL that forced him to miss 2 games in 2017, and then the sports hernia and the foot bruise that knocked him out for the entirety of last season. He's dealt with a ton of injuries, and we should definitely be concerned. I think the likelihood of Devonta missing time this season is a pretty good chance. I think as of right now, with his current history, I'd be remiss to say that he's going to play a full season because there's no possible way. I think that would just be overly positive. I don't think there's a possibility. I think similar to a guy like Stephon Diggs, who has missed time in his career, Leonard Fournette, we should expect him to play only 14 games tops. And I think that's okay. And I think if in fact you are willing to take the upside of Devonta Freeman in 2019 and you can lock down Ito Smith, who's going at a very cheap price right now, I think there is a great opportunity for you to lock down the Atlanta backfield and have a pretty good RB2 with the potential of Ito Smith even being a flex in specific situations, especially against the NFC South. So other than the injury history, right? As his ADP currently stands, looking at the other running backs that are around him, I surely want some of these other guys because they've avoided injury and they have great opportunity. But then again, it really depends on what Ito Smith is capable of doing. When Tevin Coleman and Devonta Freeman were the two backs from 2016 to 2017, they had a 60-40 split. Now, between the two of them, they were able to garner 191 targets in those 2 seasons. But the question is, where are all of those targets going to go? Are they going to go towards Devonta Freeman? Is he going to have another season of 70 targets? Is that sustainable? If not, then Ito Smith has a great opportunity to not only being a flex option RB2 on this specific team, but he has the potential that if Devonta Freeman goes down, he can take this job. I think Ito Smith is talented enough. I know he's not as elusive and he's not as good of a running back in general when it comes to ball carrier vision and being able to truck in the second level and the third level. And to be honest, I don't think he's as good as a back, but I think with the opportunity of this offense, Ito Smith could run away with it if, in fact, Devonta Freeman is out for a good amount of time, which is definitely something that we should be worried about. I think anytime you have to deal with inherent injury risk with guys like Leonard Fournette, Dalvin Cook in the last couple of years, we have to be very cautious because not only do we have to draft a guy like this with such high draft capital in the first couple rounds, at least probably by the second, third, fourth round at the very latest, Devonta Freeman, he poses the volatility of your team. If in fact he goes down early, you're pretty much going to have to pack it in or hope to God that you have a guy on your bench like an Ito Smith or a guy that's going to have a breakout season. Maybe you work on the waiver wire, but wasting a pick early on and a guy like Devonta Freeman could really hurt your season. On top of that, the schedule for the Atlanta Falcons running back position going into 2019 is not great in the first 8 weeks of the season. Just looking at the schedule right now, against Minnesota, at Minnesota, week 1. Then you got to play against Philadelphia, Indianapolis, Tennessee, Houston, Arizona, Los Angeles Rams, and the Seahawks in the first 8 weeks of the season. Then you get your week 9 bye. I think if Devonta Freeman can play well in those first 8 weeks, the biggest suggestion I have for those of you out there already is trade for him in week 9. Week 9 is his bye week, sure. But if you can trade for Devonta Freeman at that point and he's healthy, the following schedule after that is beautiful. Playing against the NFC South for 5 consecutive games after that bye week. You play against New Orleans, against Carolina, against Tampa Bay, then against New Orleans, then against Carolina once again. If you want to make that push to your fantasy playoffs next year, and this year, and Devonta Freeman is healthy going in after week 9, you have to trade for him. That schedule is beautiful, and we know for a fact, if you see my 2019 fantasy football draft kit, the NFC and the Atlanta Falcons, specifically against the NFC, all of them score a bunch of points because it's shootouts, 30-plus points a game kind of messes. I mean, they're really a mess when they get to playing each other, especially against the Saints and the Falcons. Those guys, they get after it. So as of right now, for the cons, it has to do with his injury history and the presence of Ito Smith. Obviously, Ito Smith is not going to be fully Tevin Coleman, but he's definitely going to potentially even work in on that goal line. Because of the fact that Devonta Freeman's had so many concussions, you can't just let the guy run up the middle and take blows to the head. Obviously, they put in the fullback in front of him in order to ensure that, but Ito Smith could be the goal line back of this team, which he kind of was last season in those first 5-6 weeks of the season. He had a couple touchdowns and was kind of relevant in fantasy, so there's always a potential of that coming into the 2019 season, so we have to be wary of that. So let's talk about my conclusion of the specific scenario with Devonta Freeman. So like I've mentioned, in 2018, the Atlanta Falcons only ran the ball. They ran the ball far less than they usually had. They only ran the ball 2 running backs. They only had 300 running back rushing attempts last year. The year prior with Devonta Freeman, 382. So substantially, they went down in total rushing attempts. Going into 2019, I expect them to want to get back to running the ball, chew the clock, let their defense sit on the sideline, and let their offense work, because their offense is the best part of their team. The Atlanta Falcons are by far, when we think of the Atlanta Falcons, we think of Matty Ice, Julio Jones, Devonta Freeman, and this offense. We're not thinking of Deion Jones, the middle linebacker, or Keanu Neal, the safety, or one of their defense line. We're not. Is Vic Beasley still on that team? Vic Beasley didn't even do anything last year. Where did he go? They paid him money. He disappeared. So to be honest, as of right now, the Atlanta Falcons offense is everything, and I expect them to get back to form. Now, that's typically in the running game what I'm expecting. The passing game has already been established. Last year, he threw 35-plus touchdowns. That in itself is amazing. You're bringing in Derek Cutter, who's a better offensive coordinator than Steve Sarkisian. So everything offensively is going to improve. And I think by proxy, that's going to be Devonta Freeman. Now, to get to our question, whether or not this is a trust or bust pick, let's look at the landscape of the running back position at the RB2 stage. We have guys like I've mentioned, Dalvin Cook, injury history. Leonard Fournette, injury history. Chris Carson, injury history. Phillip Lindsay, broken wrist, not a big deal, but injury history. Damian Williams, dealing with a hamstring injury right now. Derrick Henry, dealing with the foot injury right now. He's walking around in a boot. Like, what's wrong with Derrick Henry? And people aren't concerned. Marlon Mack has had injury history, has not played 16-game seasons in his career thus far. Aaron Jones, injury history. What are we thinking, guys? Right? There's a lot of Kerryon Johnson, injury history. There are a lot of guys in this RB2 range that have dealt with injury history. But we're willing to say that Devonta Freeman, because of one season in which, okay, he missed the entire year, he's done. Why is that the case? Devonta Freeman, yes, he had a groin injury, required surgery. A couple seasons back, David Johnson broke his wrist, was out for the entire season. Yet we didn't write off David Johnson the following year. Sure, Devonta Freeman's had an injury history, but prior to last season, the guy missed, 2 games in 2017? In the 2 years prior, played full seasons. Why are we so concerned? This is my question to the community at this point. Why are we so concerned? Why are we so easily going to write off a guy that can potentially be an RB1 in a fantastic offense behind a great offensive line when he has so much potential because of one bogus season in which an injury ruined it? When Adrian Peterson came back from his ACL injury, did we just instantly write him off? No, that wasn't the case. Sure, he may have dropped a little bit in the fantasy boards in terms of coming off the board and being drafted quicker, sure, because everyone was scared of ACLs back then. Now that we've seen it, guys come back even better unless you're Todd Gurley and now you have arthritis. But that being said, I personally think that Devonta Freeman is not going to be a bust this year. I think with the potential of all of the attempts that Tevin Coleman is leaving behind and all the fantasy value that he's leaving behind, let's not forget Tevin Coleman had seasons in which he was scoring 8, 9, 10 touchdowns as the backup running back of this team. This team wants to run the ball. They're going to get back to that. Dan Quinn, yes, he's a defensive-minded head coach, but as a defensive-minded head coach, you know how valuable running the ball is, and that is going to be something they need to establish, and they will establish early on in 2019. So those are my opinions. I think we can trust Devonta Freeman. That's my personal opinion. What do you guys think down in the comment section? I know some of you are going to rip me a new one, but really I don't care, because the fact of the matter is we all play, we all have our own opinions, and we're all entitled to that. And we won't know the results of whether he is a trust or bust by the end of the 2019 season. Thank you everybody for watching. If you like this content, click that like button, click the subscribe button if you haven't. If you haven't checked out my Patreon, link is down in the description. Please go check it out. I appreciate all the support I could possibly get going into the 2019 season. And until next time, which will be tomorrow, definitely tomorrow, I'll talk to you guys later. Peace.